Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this event. We are super excited to launch the Kaduna Deep Dive data set for EFINA's 812 2020 survey. Apologies for the brief delay. We are waiting for the Kaduna State government to complete the setup. Apologies for that. We should be starting briefly once we have confirmation that they are ready on their end. So thank you very much, everyone. I can see guests from the CBN and from our various partners. Thank you very much for joining. Just give us a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to ask the EFINA team to please go on and share, just play our animation that kind of shows us the financial inclusion journey so far in Nigeria. I'll be back again shortly, hopefully, to commence the event. Thank you very much, everyone. Once we have confirmation that they are ready on their end. Thank you very much for that. Once again, apologies for the delay in starting this session. We are still waiting for the Kaduna State government to confirm that they're ready on their end they're trying to get the governor in the room and also set up. Apologies, everyone. But in the meantime, we are thinking it will be good for the panelists to introduce themselves. And we could also use that kind of as an opportunity to test audio and sound. So I'm just going to ask the panelists to kindly introduce themselves. I don't know, Henrietta, do you want to start and maybe just call on the panelists to do that?
Thank you, Tommy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Henrietta Bankole Olushino. I am the managing director, I beg your pardon, I am the country director for Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors in Nigeria. Prior to that, I was the managing director for ARM Financial Advisors, as well as the group head of corporate transformation and executive responsible for IT for the ARM group. Before that, I spent over 14 years at Accenture, as at the time I left, I was financial services lead for management consulting. I really look forward to the session today. I am the moderator for the panel session, and I will hand over to Dr. Paul Oluikpe to introduce himself. Paul.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Greta. My name is Paul Oluikpe. I'm the associate head of the Financial Inclusion Secretariat at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Financial Inclusion Delivery at the CBN. Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
Paul, your sound is fading in and out.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, now okay. We can.
Okay, I said my name is Paul Oluikpe, the associate head of the Financial Inclusion Delivery Unit at the Central Bank of Nigeria. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I also see Dotun Ifebogun of Wema Bank. Dotun, if you could please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dotun Ifebogun. I'm the divisional head retail business of Wema Bank, and I cover the topics of financial inclusion, product development, and sales. I'm happy to be on this panel. Thank you.
Welcome, Dotun. Please, can you confirm? I see Kaduna State setting up. We have quite a number of speakers from Kaduna State. So if I just ask Saude Atoibi, if you could please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Saude Atoibi. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff Administration to the Kaduna State Governor. Thank you.
Sorry, Saude, you can say more than that. You're also the
focal person
for social intervention. Yes. Which is a way for us to bring those who are at the bottom of the ladder up in the state. So this is where financial inclusion is crucial and why she's a major part of this dialogue.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much and welcome Saude to the panel. I'd also like to call Zayad Siga. Zayad, if you could please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Zayad Siga. I'm the Executive Secretary of Kaduna State Residence Registration Agency. I'm also the Council Secretary of the Kaduna State Economic Development Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Zayad. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome Gerald Ilukwe to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gerald Idukwe. I'm the Chief Information Officer of the state and Special Advisor on ICT to the governor. Thank you. You're welcome.
Welcome, Gerald. Without much ado, that's our panel for this afternoon. We look forward to having interesting discussions, especially eliciting the findings from the survey that is about to be launched, but more importantly, to also facilitate discussions around the partnerships and collaborations that are required to drive a financially inclusive and economically inclusive Kaduna State. Thank you. With this, I hand it back to Efina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrietta, for that. I think we are set now on, from the Kaduna State Government State Office. I think I can hand over to Nasser to pick up and lead us through the session.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay and for starting late. A very good morning to all our distinguished participants, to those of us here in the chamber, and to those of you online. I would like to, of course, recognize the presence of the senior advisor and counselor, who is also the chairman of the Kaduna State Financial Inclusion Steering Committee, other members of council here present, and of course, to those online. I would like to also recognize the country director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, representatives of FCDO, commercial banks here, microfinance banks, and other distinguished guests. So my name is Nasser Ingawa. I'm the technical advisor to the governor on financial inclusion. I'll be the compare and anchor of this very important event. As most of us are already aware, the A2F survey is a biennial national survey that has been happening in Nigeria since 2008, if I'm correct. This time around, or rather for the first time in 2020, Afina decided to do a pilot of a deep dive. So going beyond measuring access and usage at the national level, but to also look at what is happening at the local level. And of course, the deep dive has happened at no other place other than here in Kaduna, looking at the 23 local government area councils that we have here in the state. So of course, Kaduna State Government appreciates Afina's efforts, as well as that of the Gates Foundation, for pretty much assisting the state government assess usage and access at the local government. Just some very quick housekeeping notes. Of course, this is a hybrid event. There's some of us here physically in the chamber, and there's some online. Apologies for any technical glitches that might happen even before they do happen. The event has two parts. The first part, we would mostly listen to remarks and the presentation of Afina. The second part, as Henrietta had earlier mentioned, is that of the panel discussion, essentially to underscore and better understand what Kaduna State has been doing since its objective of achieving financial inclusion. The first part will last just under an hour, and the second part will also last under an hour. We implore our participants to use the chat box. We have people on standby who would answer any questions, suggestions, or even recommendations. However, in the interest of time, I think we will use the Q&A window in the second part of the session to answer any questions, unless there are any pressing issues that would be presented during Afina's presentation. I think we can leave everything till the Q&A in the second window. I would also quickly like to recognize the Chief of Staff to Kaduna State Governor Mohammed Sani Dattijo, who is here with us as well. With those housekeeping notes, I think we can go ahead and begin. I would like to invite the chairman of the Financial Inclusion Technical Steering Committee to give us his opening remarks. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this important gathering. It's important for many reasons, but before doing so, let me acknowledge the presence of my colleagues to Kaduna State Government side, Chief of Staff, Mohammed Sani Atijo, Commissioner Planning and Budget, Thomas Young, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, the CIO, the head of Kaduna Resident Registration Agency, Deputy Chief of Staff, ladies and gentlemen. You know, the critical importance of this gathering is best envisioned by saying that the main purpose of any government, and indeed this government, which we take very seriously, is the security of lives and property and the provision of the basic necessities of lives to our citizens. If we fail to do that, as a government, we're not fit for purpose. And this is why this is a very crucial subject for Kaduna State government. Before any survey, any study, the governor, leader Madam Nasir El-Rufai, realized this. That was essentially the platform for the campaign in 2014, 2015, which is that we wanted a change that would make governance more responsible and more receptive to the less privileged members of our society. Governance shouldn't be for the privileged few, like less than 1% of the population. Governance should be for the purpose of pulling more people out of poverty, the majority, the 90, 95, 99% of the population. So it is the quest to ensure that we can serve and support and lift more and more of our people out of poverty that makes Kaduna State government to attract a lot of importance to this subject. So we started our efforts to achieve the goal by taking several giant steps since 2015 when Governor Nasir El-Rufai came to office. The first of such culminated in the enactment of the Kaduna Residence Registration Agency, because we know that you cannot serve your people, you cannot support them, you cannot assist them without having the data on who they are, where they live, what they do, and what their needs are. It is the beginning, the foundation. When the governor came into office, there are estimates of population, which we had to project from 2006 national census to 2015. That is, of course, a very, very crude data. It's not scientific. It's not refined in any way. We don't know who these people are, where they live, what they do, and how the government can better serve them. So we thought embarking on residence registration is the way to go. And therefore, the agency was established. We thank God now we've captured about 4 million out of 9.5 to 10 million people in Kaduna State. So at least 40% of the residents are now known. We know who they are, we know the demography, we know what they do, and we are better able to reach them with several of the interventions in the state. Another prerequisite for ensuring the government is able to serve the people better is that of technology, adoption of technology. Technology in this case, we can divide into two. Of course, you have the basic technology of e-governance, which we believe is crucial to effective and efficient operation of any government. And again, the governor attached great importance to this, and we're the first sub-national in the country, if not in the African region, to sign on to an e-governance engagement with Microsoft. It's a very expensive engagement, but that's the foundation upon which governance was being built in Kaduna State. Ultimately, we want to be able to reach our people as quickly and as effectively as possible, and you cannot do that without technology. The second half of technology, of course, is the communication infrastructure. Without communication infrastructure, it doesn't matter what you have, like e-governance, you will not be able to address the people. So we engaged IHS. That is more recent than the engagement of Microsoft to out of our 25 local governments, we discovered that as many as 10, 11 of them have no mobile connection whatsoever, no network. So there's no way we can serve them well without addressing the infrastructural deficit. So we engage IHS at considerable cost to energize 40 different communities in the states, scattered across the 10, 11 local governments that I mentioned. And we've done about 50% of those. It's ongoing. We have another 20 or so to complete. The next effort was to do a feasibility study on exactly where we are in terms of financial inclusion for the entire residents of Kaduna State. We got support and assistance from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in doing the study, for which we are very, very grateful as a state. We got the report last year. We took it to the cabinet this year. It was approved, but the cost is prohibitive. So we're looking for ways and means of being able to implement the recommendations in the study. So gathering of this nature would no doubt assist us in engaging partners and getting other interested players, stakeholders in the industry to work with us in delivering and implementing the findings of the study that was done for us. And then on the back of the study, closely aligned to it, is this survey by FINA. So no doubt the data that we gather from the study will be complemented or perhaps amplified by the survey that FINA has conducted. And this is why this gathering is very important to us. We welcome each and every one of us as participants. The governor sends his greetings and regards. The governor attaches a lot of importance to this event. He would have been here personally, but we're all humans. He took ill yesterday, had to leave the office early, and under doctor's prescription, he's still resting. But the deputy governor is on standby to fill in for the governor's absence. So we want to learn, we want to listen, we want to have some takeaways on what we can do to assist us to better lift more and more of Kaduna State residents out of poverty, and hence be a responsive government that is serving our people better. Thank you very much, Mr. Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. SAC. At this point, I am guessing that everyone is excited and looking forward to listening to this very rich and diverse data from FINA, which is as rich and diverse as the residents of Kaduna State themselves. But just before we get into that, I would like to invite the country director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to deliver his keynote address. Dr. Jeremy Zongana, please, the floor is yours. Over, thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you mind opening my video, allowing me to unless I can do it with the video. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's such a great pleasure and honor for me to join this very important gathering on behalf of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, especially on behalf of the Department of Financial Service for Poor, to give a few remarks on this very important occasion. I would like to, first of all, acknowledge everyone present here. Notably, I want to acknowledge Kaduna State Governance member for the great initiative to undertake this exercise that is very important. I also know that we saw the introduction of a number of very important panelists and other institution members that have been supporting this initiative. I really want to acknowledge them and appreciate their presence for those who are in person as well as those who are connected around the world. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is built on the belief that all life have equal value. And we work to ensure that everyone, irrespective of who they are and where they live, can live a healthy and productive life. By partnering with a broad range of stakeholders, we address gaps in health, economic opportunity, and education. Our partnership with the government of Nigeria is on initiative that improve human capital development and accelerate the country's progress in meeting the sustainable development goals. We share in the government commitment to end hunger in Nigeria, to ensure Nigerians are healthy and to promote their well-being and to advance gender equality in the country. We value our partnership with the Kaduna state government in meeting the health and economic expectation of residents. I would like to specially highlight our collaboration on the state response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to building a resilient and sustainable primary health care system. The foundation also believes that everyone benefits from an economic that includes everyone. Yet globally, we see that billions are excluded from a formal economy. The inability to participate in the formal financial sector is a proxy of this form of exclusion. And in Nigeria, an estimated of 52.5 million adults, and by extension, the household that depend on them, suffer before of this exclusion. You may ask why inclusion matter. Well, studies show that digital financial inclusion help to increase consumption, the ability to cope with shock, and contribute to reducing extreme poverty. At an individual women perspective, there is strong evidence that digital financial inclusion expands the breadth of her support network and expedite the speed of transfer received during period of acute need. Digital financial services empower already working women to shift to more productive occupation and enable non-working women to enter the labor force. Furthermore, micro-entrepreneurs and firms that use formal financial services are more likely to invest in fixed assets and thereby increase their productivity. They are also likely to move their saving away from informal means to formal account. Finally, we see government around the world leveraging the spread of digital technology to improve their capacity to serve their citizens and residents. For example, benefit transfer and social grants are being paid directly into account, and public services now utilize digital identification and financial channel. This is helping to improve transparency and security and reduce leakage leading to significant fiscal savings. The commitment made by Your Excellencies and Executive Council to prioritize digitalization is commendable. Your leadership is taking advantage of digital tools to reach and better serve residents by strengthening digital governance, digital infrastructure, and digital integration for financial inclusion can serve as an exemplar to other states, and we believe it will be. The presentation of funding from the survey on access and use of financial services in Kaduna State will provide important baseline for measuring progress. It will also highlight the scale of the challenge that lie ahead. This is a challenge worth tackling, which when surmounted delivers compounding benefit. I would like again to use this opportunity to thank FINA team for the great work well done, and thank everyone for your interest in financial inclusion. As you mentioned, you may know, according to many studies, well-functioning financial systems serve a vital purpose, offering saving, credit, payment, and risk management products to people with a wide range of needs. Inclusive financial system allowing broad access to financial service without price or non-price barrier to their use are especially likely to benefit poor people and other disadvantaged groups. Without inclusive financial system, poor people must rely on their own limited saving to invest in their education or become entrepreneur. And small enterprise might rely on their limited earning to pursue a promising growing opportunity. This can contribute to persistent income inequality and slow economic growth. We look forward to our continuous partnership with Kaduna State. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Country Director. Thank you for the continuous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you for your kind gestures. We're forever grateful. At this point, I would like to invite Afina to provide, or rather to give us the presentation, the icing on the cake. Over to you, Ashley.
Great. Thank you, Nasir. Senior Advisor and Counselor and Chair of the Kaduna State Financial Inclusion Steering Committee. And esteemed colleagues in Kaduna State Government and on the line with us, I'll ask you to please allow me to rest on existing protocol. Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. We will jump into our presentation. So if we can start to pull up the presentation slides, which I see are coming up from the Kaduna State side here. As we're doing so, I'll just provide a little bit of context. So about Afina. Afina is an organization that promotes financial inclusion in Nigeria. We've been operating since we were founded in 2007. We've been working to promote inclusive finance in the country of Nigeria. And we conduct research, advocacy, capacity building, and have a strong focus on innovation and digital financial services. As Nasir mentioned, under the research arm, part of what Afina does is a nationwide survey every 2 years called the Access to Financial Services in Nigeria survey. And this has been carried out every 2 years since 2008 to measure financial inclusion, also understand the behaviors of financial behaviors of Nigerians, what financial services are they using to meet their needs, where are there gaps or opportunities, and to help inform policy decisions as well as business decisions for various stakeholders to expand financial inclusion and thereby really improve the kind of well-being and livelihoods of individuals and households, as well as lead to some of the broader benefits of financial inclusion that the Gates Foundation country directors spoke to so articulately just a moment ago. So if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, please. As Nasir mentioned, for the first time ever in the 12-year history of this survey, Athena has conducted a deep dive version of the survey in Kaduna State. And this is, please next slide. This is the first time that we've done such in-depth research at the state level. Perfect, this slide would be great. Yes, the one that says objectives. Thank you. And while the nationwide survey provides headline data at the state level, this Kaduna State Deep Dive Survey provides some headline information at the local government area level, which is the first time we've ever done that. And really a much more robust data set that allows us to do much deeper analysis about the state of financial inclusion in Kaduna State. And it is our hope that this will support the success of some of the initiatives that the SAC spoke about earlier, as well as really enable a wide range of stakeholders, including financial service providers, to expand financial inclusion in the state. So if you would please advance to the next slide, I will just quickly touch on our approach. For the survey, because this was part of a nationwide survey, Athena works with the National Bureau of Statistics to provide the sampling. We sampled almost 4,800 respondents across Kaduna State alone, and have a representative sample per local government area. If you scroll down slightly, please. We then go through a process of weighting the results and also engaged with the Kaduna State Bureau of Statistics on that process, and have been partnering with them on discussing the results, and intend to continue to partner with them in taking the results forward as well. Yes, perfect. So we can continue forward. Thank you. So I'll speak to a little.
Sorry, we are not seeing the slide. Can you make sure that participants are seeing the slide?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying. So we'll stop screen sharing from the Kaduna State Government House. For the Athena team, could you please share the slides again? And we'll just see it on both sides remotely. Thanks very much for mentioning that. And I think, as Nasir mentioned, there are some challenges in doing a hybrid approach. So, okay, great. We can see the slides. Henrietta, or somebody from Athena, could you confirm if you can see from? Okay, perfect.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Excellent, great. So we can advance to the demographics context section, please. There we go. Thank you. And I'll just say, since we got a bit of a late start and we just have a lot of content here, I'm not going to touch on every data point in every slide right now. These slides will be available to all participants, physical and virtual, after, and will be available online. And we'll share a link to that later. So to very briefly provide a little bit of context, I'll say that the population figures at left are only for adults. So this survey sample, we start at adults 18 years and older. So this, we know that there is a very large youth population in Kaduna State as well, but here's the breakdown for adults. And I'll just highlight that some interesting things here. You know, there's still significantly rural population, but mobile phone ownership nationwide has grown and is also quite high in Kaduna State among adults as well, which presents some interesting opportunities that we'll speak about. If we advance to the next slide, We just wanted to highlight very briefly, I think most of us would expect this, but as we've seen nationwide, the livelihoods of adults in Kaduna State were 84% of adults in Kaduna State were negatively affected by the pandemic, which also means that now is a good time for us to be thinking about our next steps in rebuilding. Moving to the next slide. So I'll be sharing a few different views of data today. The first is the measurement of financial access in the state. And first, I'll just provide a little bit of context about how we measure this for Athena. We break out financial access into a few different categories. And first, we look at financially included versus completely excluded. Then within financially included, we also break down a little bit further to look at those who use formal or regulated financial services versus those financial services that are informal or unregulated, such as a savings group or cooperative. So if you go to the next slide, please. What we see, this slide provides the national and the data at a national level as well as by geopolitical zone, just to provide a little bit of context. So the top bar here is the national level data, and I'll talk through this one. So what we see here is that blue category means that 45% of adults in Nigeria overall are banked, so they have or use a bank account. The 6% in the yellow box are people who aren't banked but use some sort of formal or regulated financial service, and that might be a microfinance bank, it might be mobile money, it might be insurance, etc. Then we see the 14% in the green box are people who don't use any formal or regulated financial services, but use some sort of informal or unregulated, such as a savings group, savings collector, cooperative, money lender, etc. And then in the red box, the 36% are the adults that are completely financially excluded. So they may be saving money, but they're saving at home with cash. They may be borrowing, but they're borrowing from a family member or friend, again, using cash. And what we see on this slide is that there are also large disparities by region, by geopolitical zone. And the Northwest has the highest rates of financial exclusion in the country, which is important for many reasons, but also it's a very large population in the Northwest. So really, when we look at nationwide targets, then achieving targets in the Northwest is critical to achieving any progress nationwide. If we move to the next slide, now we'll look at the data more specifically for Kaduna State. So what we can see here is that financial inclusion in Kaduna State is actually higher than the regional average in the Northwest. So a third of adults in Kaduna State are banked. An additional 5% who are not banked use some sort of formal or regulated service. Of those who aren't using formal services, about 7% are relying on informal services. But we still see that over half, so 55% of adults are completely financially excluded in Kaduna State. So while Kaduna State is leading the region, there's still quite a bit more that can be done in growing financial access. On the next slide, we see, thank you. You can skip this one. Yeah, so we see that this compares the 2020 and 2018 data. So in 2018, our data wasn't as detailed, but we can capture financial access at the state level overall. And what we see in terms of trend is there's a slight increase in the proportion of adults that are banked, which is the same as the nationwide trend in Nigeria in that time period. But we still see that overall financial exclusion has remained the same. So again, just showing it could have been worse, especially given COVID, but there's still a lot more we could do. Moving to the next slide. So now we will drill down a little bit deeper under those numbers by looking at some different demographic groups. So the first way that we looked at this is by age. And what we see here is that the youngest adults tend to be the most financially excluded. And that's important for many reasons, including the fact that there's a large young adult population. Moving to the next slide. Another significant correlation that we see nationally and in Kaduna State is that financial inclusion is very strongly correlated with levels of education as well. On the next slide, thank you. One of the things that we also pay a lot of attention to is gender disparities in financial inclusion. What we see here is that, so the bottom two bars represent the male and female levels of access in 2018. At the top is the data for 2020. What we see is that, unfortunately, the gender gap in financial inclusion in Kaduna State has actually increased between 2018 and 2020. So that was already important, but also underscores the urgency around really thinking about gender considerations. And on the next slide, we have a few data points that illustrate some of the gender differences. So we see that there are gender differences in terms of, there's definitely a gender gap in education, which is important for many, many reasons, but also contributes to, is correlated with financial inclusion. We see, however, that women in Kaduna State are actually quite economically active, and about half say that their primary source of income is from their own business. And a significant proportion also own mobile phones. So there's a lot of opportunity here. At the bottom part of this slide, we also have some context data about that highlights more the social norms and decision-making and how this might influence gender gaps in financial access. So we see that there are really some significant gender disparities in financial decision-making, financial control within the household. And at the bottom, only 21% of women have the final say on whether or not they can work to earn income versus 87% of men. So this illustrates some of the kind of context around differences in women's economic empowerment that also is reflected in these financial inclusion figures. Moving to the next slide. Another way that we look at this data is by primary source of income. So what we see here is that there's some significant differences. So for adults that are employed in the formal sector, like a large company or government, almost all of them are banked. I would guess probably most people in this room are banked. But when we look at adults who are employed, so earn salary or wages from a company, but the business is an informal, smaller non-registered business, then we see a drop. So less than half of them are using regulated financial services. As we move down, we see that people who are primarily dependent on like a spouse or a parent or another friend or family member are more likely to be excluded. And actually we see in Kaduna State very higher above, compared to the nation overall, we see higher rates of exclusion among people who primarily rely on farming or agriculture for their primary source of income. So that's a very important group in Kaduna State. So if we move to the next slide, we have a little bit more data around this, and this is something that we can also do deeper dives after this launch event. But just to highlight a few data points here, we see, as you may expect, a lot of people who primarily rely on agriculture live in rural areas. Many of them are not aware of a bank branch or a financial access point close to them. But at the same time, phone ownership actually is pretty high among this group. So there is some opportunity for extending digital services that include digital financial service component. On the next slide, we see kind of a wide disparity in rural and urban access to financial services. On the next slide, I think the next one is our last. And then also looking at geographic or regional differences. So this slide has a lot of data, and I think that this is something we can continue to discuss after this initial launch.
Sorry, Ashley. Please permit me, ladies and gentlemen, and those here and those online, to welcome Her Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Kaduna State, Dr. Adiza Rabe, who's not only here in a capacity as a Deputy Governor, but will also be delivering the address of His Excellency the Governor, who has in addition to excellence, we also have a bonus. One of the next line, highest line of elected officer in the state, Senator Basani, representing Kaduna Central, is also there.
Thank you.
Ashley, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. So if you'll permit me, we were just presenting some of the data from the research findings. So I'll continue with the discussion about financial inclusion per local government area. And I think the takeaway here is that, as we would expect, we see wide disparity per local government area. And this is something that we can kind of look at as we're strategizing around building financial inclusion in the state overall in the coming years. So on the next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, so just to highlight, looking at that red box, the people who are completely financially excluded, we have a little bit of context here. Again, quite a few people have access to or own mobile phones. So we see this continuing thread of opportunity around mobile. Also, while they're not using financial services, some of them are saving, are borrowing, are sending, receiving money through family and friends, and all of them are making payments. So there really is opportunity for expanding financial services to them. Moving to the next section. So just to highlight a few points here, and I won't talk through all of this again, but what we see is that although we see high rates of exclusion in the Northwest, Kaduna State is really leading the region in financial inclusion so far. And while that's great, there's more work that remains to be done. And we can see that there's some opportunities emerging, and I'll highlight some additional opportunities in the data, including looking at the financial inclusion gender gap, as well as some of the other excluded groups. So moving to the next section. Next, we have just a few slides around use. So we said, okay, people are banked, but we want to highlight a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper there. So we said 1/3 of adults are banked. What are they using their accounts for? Largely saving or sending or receiving money. On the next slide, looking at those, what we call the other formal, so non-bank services, but regulated services. We see that a lot of adults in Kaduna State are using agents. So this is really highlights the opportunity for driving access into rural areas. Obviously, it's starting to work. There's a business model that's being deployed and people are actually using, and I think that presents a lot of opportunity for building on that. On the next slide, looking at the informal services that people use, the most common are the village or community associations or savings groups, savings thrift. And those play an important role in people's financial lives. There's also opportunity to potentially digitize those. On the next slide, part of what we cover in this survey is for people who aren't using different financial services, we ask why. And there's more data in the survey, but I'll just highlight a few data points here. On the banking side, when we say, why don't you use banks? A lot of people say access to banks is an issue. So banks are too far, it costs too much to reach a bank. Again, highlighting the need to expand agent networks. We also, a lot of people say, I don't have regular income, I don't have a job, banks are too expensive. Those people still have financial lives. So there's an opportunity to reach them with formal financial services. We just need to come up with a model that is affordable to them and that they perceive to be designed to them. On the next slide, please. I'll just highlight here that we ask about some other kinds of financial services, mobile money, insurance, which very few adults in the nation and Kaduna State are using. But when we ask people, would you be interested? A lot of adults in Kaduna State, 1.5 million adults say that they're interested in mobile money. And a significant number are also interested in microinsurance. So I think that there's, again, this highlights some opportunity for expanding financial inclusion. On the next slide, please. So I think what I'll highlight on this slide is that, again, as I mentioned, we see some barriers cited, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the data, including using affordable, relevant digital financial services and some channels such as agent networks to reach those excluded groups. So moving to the next section, this is really the last category of data we wanted to cover, and then I'll wrap up. So one of the, we look at financial access, we look at what are people using, but coming back to the remarks made by the SAC when we opened, really what we care about is the well-being of people. So fundamentally, it doesn't really matter if you have a bank account if it's not doing you any good. We also measure financial health. So what's the financial well-being of adults in Kaduna State? And we have 4 different categories. The first on this slide is about building reserves, which is basically savings or investment. So there's reasons why people need to have money or assets available to them. And we see that in Kaduna State, almost 9 out of 10 adults are building or maintaining reserves. A significant proportion are saving or investing. On the next slide, we see that also 69% of adults are planning ahead financially. And the most frequently cited goal is starting or expanding a business. On the next slide, where the data starts to look a little bit less positive around our financial health measures is around people's ability to manage their day-to-day finances. So the language on this slide is sort of fancy. It talks about liquidity distress, but that basically means 78% of adults said at some point in the past year, they didn't have the money available when they needed it to pay for something. And in most of those cases, they categorized that as severe. So it was a significant problem for their household. And concerningly, we see a lot of, when we ask people, how do you cope? A lot of people say they did nothing or they cut down on expenses. So this is an area that we hope to see improvement on the next time that we come back and measure. And then on the next slide, the last category we look at for financial health is how do you cope with shocks? And we saw that 54% of adults in Kaduna State said in the past year, something happened that made it really difficult to pay for things. This year, we saw a lot more people refer to economic impact. So price increases, recession, lost my job, et cetera. And then people always also cite serious illness of a household member, which can then lead, if that person is a primary breadwinner, can put the household at risk. Moving to the next slide. So and Choma, if you click down one more time, the boxes will come up too. Thank you. So what we see overall is that in Kaduna State, adults tend to do on average, kind of score a little bit better on saving and planning, but not as well around the ability to manage risk and manage day-to-day expenditure. So on the next slide, we've just sort of aggregated this into an overall financial health score. On the right-hand side is the score for Kaduna State. And what this shows is that 25% of adults in Kaduna State are considered financially healthy. So again, we hope that our collaborative efforts will increase this number by the time we come back to measure again. So moving on, we can skip this slide. Yeah, the last thing I'll highlight is that, and we see this across, particularly across the Northwest and Northeast zones, but while we've been looking at financial services such as banking, et cetera, we also see that investment in assets plays a really important role for adults in Kaduna State. You know, more than 60% of adults have some kind of non-financial asset, such as agriculture, property, or land. And that's when we ask people, you know, how do you cope with shocks, et cetera, you know, many of them will say that they sell assets or are relying on these assets. So I think that's also something important for us to be thinking about as we think about building financial health and also a financial system that works around existing behaviors. So on the next slide, we can skip this one. What I'll just highlight here is that, you know, we see opportunity in the data for expanding the use of digital financial services. While we have 28% of adults in Kaduna State using some sort of digital account where they can keep money, we see the numbers go down if we look at kind of different groups within that. So women, low-income women in particular. And so there's opportunity to increase basically all the numbers on these slides. Moving to the next slide, please. So I think overall, on the financial health side, we see that only 1 in 4 adults in Kaduna State are really considered financially healthy. And we see a lot of people using non-financial mechanisms to kind of meet their financial needs. And there's an opportunity for expanding formal financial services. So to wrap up on the next slide, I'll just highlight a few sort of overall takeaways here. As we've said, I think that there's a really tremendous opportunity to drive financial inclusion in Kaduna State through access to affordable, relevant digital financial services. And I think that this could also lead growth in financial inclusion for the Northwest region overall, if we're able to drive this progress in Kaduna State. Some specific things that we can be doing. One is bridging those infrastructure gaps. So looking at expanding agent networks. Where we see, for example, when we look at the local government area level, several LGAs in Kaduna State have 0 bank branches, or maybe 1 bank branch. Bank branches are very expensive to operate. So it's not realistic to put many bank branches in every single local government area. But we've seen people have started using agents. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to expand those kinds of services. The second to last bullet, we can also look at developing digital financial services use cases. Something that the government can think about is introducing procurement criteria to encourage digitization and formalization of vendors. And that can happen at the local government area level as well. And then last, just to come back to the wide and expanding gender gap in financial access, I think it's important to really prioritize the financial inclusion of women. And that's something I think Athena and other stakeholders are prepared to support going forward. So I'll leave it at that for the data. On the last slide, I just wanted to highlight the fact that this is a quick overview of the key findings. There's quite a bit more here, and what we would welcome from Kaduna State government, from other stakeholders, who have joined us virtually, is any feedback or requests around additional information you would want to see, because there are many, many other deeper dive reports that could be generated here. For those who like working in data directly, the data sets are also available, and of course will be made available to government, and we'll be partnering with Kaduna State Bureau of Statistics on additional analysis as well. So I'll wrap up here. Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ashley, for this very insightful data. I think the beauty of the data here to me is that it is data not just for policy making, but also for business investments, and perhaps even on a lighter note, even for political strategy. Just looking at mobile phone ownership in Kaduna, looking at all the areas where need access, also looking at the opportunities around closing the gender gap. So thank you very much, Ashley. I am not sure whether we would like to just proceed with the remarks by Her Excellency, or maybe anyone in the room here physically present would like to provide comments or seek clarifications on the data before we invite Her Excellency to give her remarks. I know online there have been people who have been raising their hands, but I would like to believe Choma and her team would address whatever recommendations, questions, or suggestions in the Q&A. If there's nobody, okay, the floor to you, Mr. Chief of Staff.
Thank you very much, Nasser. Thank you very much to Athena and to Ashley, Gates Foundation, for this really good piece of work. I think it provides us with a lot of evidence to be able to plan further, to deepen the inclusion levels in the state, especially on the financial side. I'm quite curious. There was an earlier survey, I believe in 2017 or 18, that looked specifically at the plight of, I believe, maternal health workers at the time, and the salary payments that they, that they used to get. And one of the stories from that research was that when they were paid their salaries, because they were not located close to any bank, they basically had to travel for a full day to withdraw the money, and they had to withdraw it in full because they couldn't go back multiple times during the month, and then travel back on the way, going through a lot of hardships. And because they removed everything, they would most likely spend it in a very short period of time. A lot of times it was stolen, and that more or less perpetuated a cycle of deep poverty. So my question, seeing this data now, I mean, it's going to be useful across various sectors, of course, but even starting from a government perspective in the way that we pay our workers, especially those that are at the rural levels that don't have financial access. For example, I think Makafi was the worst local government that I saw. Would there be some stylistic recommendations regarding how we deploy agents, money agents, for example, for these workers at that bottom rung to be able to access their resources in a way that defeats the, that caters for the surveys that we found in 2017, 2018. Because of course, if you remove your entire salary, no matter how much it is, and you put it under your pillow, it is most likely that your capacity to spend is going to be much, much higher. So I think that's the first real point that I wanted to ask your opinion on. The second is really just on the identity inclusion mix, right? And I mean, we have about 3 million, 4 million people now that have digital identities. Is it possible to merge this lack of inclusion financially to, and I know the digital agency have been working on this, to ensure that maybe cards are not the way to go now because there's no ATM at those locations, right? So even installing a chip wouldn't really help that. But how do we, using those identities, be able to bring more of these people into the formal financial system? So I think the last one I have is on the informal sector. You know, we have an economy that's about 75% informal, and sometimes deliberately so by the actors that are actually trying to escape formality, because when you come into the formal system, you are liable for tax and some of the other things. How do we better deploy this data to get a transition going on in terms of the informal to formal sector? I think that's going to be very critical as we move forward. You mentioned our farmers and women. So if we can design programs, particularly to address these areas, I think it would be very, very important and critical. And I think it's something that beyond the surveys, we need to be able to action the data into policy and into implementation. But fantastic piece of work, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And
sorry, Ashley. Can we take comments from those?
Oh, sure.
So we don't have exclusion.
I think we might, because we have when we have the panel discussion, I think we'll pick up some additional Q&A then. So Nasir, I think maybe should we just take the questions in the room now?
Let's do one or two. Let's
okay.
One or two from. I'm mindful of financial
institutions. Sure. So perhaps, so we've not gone through the list yet. Would Tomi or Choma, would you be able to suggest one or two questions that have popped up in the Q&A? I know we have many.
Maybe we can just speak to the people raising.
Yes, let's do a couple of those questions.
Okay, sure. So if we can see the person, or we can select somebody raising a hand. I can't see them. So if you could.
The two participants raised hands.
Yeah.
Pick down of that.
Hello. Good afternoon. Hello. Hi, this is Ben Jones, the British Deputy High Commissioner, normally based in Lagos. I just happened to be in the UK on a brief holiday. But really just to say, firstly, fascinated by the presentation. Huge thank you to Athena and as the FCDO, Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, very proud to be a partner in having helped to produce the report. I guess my question is, to what extent do you think mobile money, if it were more widespread, would address so many of the questions and challenges that you've outlined? And just to underscore our commitment to helping in this area in the future and to being a partner to Kaduna State Government, of course. Over. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Should we take one more?
Yes.
From the webinar?
3 participants raised hands. I can read people.
Yeah, so Athena team, could you help us select one more person
of the three
that raised their hands, unmute and allow that person to answer. We can't see the list.
Yes, that's one. Suleiman Hassan.
All right, Suleiman, please.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Oops, I think he's muted.
Muted. Suleiman, we're waiting for you. Suleiman Hassan. Can you hear us? You're muted. No.
Oh, I think he's unmuted now.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Hello, hello.
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 We can
hello.
hear you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Shola. I thank you very much for this program. I've enjoyed it, even though we couldn't see the slide, but at least we listened to the presenter. I just want to ask, to what extent is the insurance penetration captured in that survey? Because insurance is one of the things that we can use to as a kind of a mitigant in the case of calamity, and that the attitude to insurance in Nigeria generally has been so poor. The contribution of insurance to GDP is less than 1%. The insurance density is also less than 1%, which means if you divide the number of people with insurance, the premium to GDP is very low. So to what extent is that survey capture the role that insurance can play in financial inclusion? Thank you very much. Shola Guni is my name once again.
All right, thank you very much. So I think maybe I'll take those three questions. As I mentioned, we'll pick up more in later sections of the discussion. But first of all, I think that all of those questions were really spot on and very insightful. So that was, if I couldn't have chosen better myself, because I think that really highlights a lot of the kind of opportunity and next steps that we've also seen in the data. I think, so looking at the question, and I'll sort of answer them all together. So looking at the question of agents and then mobile money, which are sort of often connected, I think that there's really tremendous opportunity for expanding mobile financial services, mobile money, et cetera. And oftentimes, and agent networks, which the mobile money services basically ride on. I think that it's, you know, the use case that you've cited around people need to travel for a day to collect their salary and withdrawing cash is just like a prime illustration of the reason that's needed. And when people need to travel to collect their salary, that also means that really nobody in their community, everybody in their community is transacting in cash. So even if they receive, that one person received money into a digital account, it's difficult for them to spend because, you know, the activity in that area is happening in cash. So there's opportunity through, but as we saw in the data, a lot of people own mobile phones. We're seeing some people start to use agents. So if we expand mobile money, expand agent networks, the government making those salary payments or even those humanitarian or social transfers digitally is actually a great catalyst for almost helping to build a business case for those mobile financial services, because the agents will start making money because they have customers, the mobile money operators or, you know, banks are starting to make money. So that's actually, I think, an excellent starting point to help spur that system. Once you have agents operating and mobile financial services used in those regions, then those people who are receiving their payments digitally can then also transact digitally in the community. And that's how you can also help to have a sort of ripple effect of expanded financial inclusion as well. So I think that's tremendously important. I think that to the point of shifting from informal to formal, yes, definitely. There are incentives sometimes to stay informal. I think, but we see that people, when we ask people who are unbanked or financially excluded, do you want to use some of these formal services? A lot of them say yes. You know, we saw in the data, I believe 1.5 million adults in Kaduna State said that they want to use mobile money. A lot of unbanked people say they want to use bank accounts. And I think that what we need to get right is the access. We need to get right the value and affordability. And then the services that are the incentive. So it's, as you mentioned, receiving your salary easily might be an incentive to open an account. Sometimes access to credit is an incentive to open an account. So just kind of working collaboratively to build those out.
welfare.
Social, exactly. Having access to social welfare, you'll definitely open a bank account if you're going to get get money into that account. I think to the point, ID, I think is really critical. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that on the panel as well. But that's one of the things we saw in our data is that the most commonly held form of ID is a voter's card. But a lot of people don't have the documents required to open a full service bank account. So it's important to build it. And I was really excited to hear how much progress Kaduna State has made so far in the identity drive. I think that presents a lot of opportunity for expanding financial services. And then last, to the point of insurance. Yes, so we saw 1% of adults use insurance in Kaduna State. But a lot of people, when we're conducting the survey and we explain the term microinsurance and we say, do you want this? A lot of people say that they want it. They just aren't using it because they don't know where to get it or haven't thought about it yet. So I think I agree that it's very important. And also I think that there's a lot of market opportunity, and that can also provide some of these incentives even for starting to move into the formal system. So I think I'll leave it there, and then we can pick up more in the panel discussion from the other panelists as well.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Ashley. I think at this point, it will be my distinguished pleasure to invite Her Excellency, Dr. Hadiza Balarabe, to give her remarks. Her Excellency, the floor is yours.
Excellency, if you want more time, we can take it after the panel. It's up to you. So you don't feel rushed. It's entirely up to you.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah, our distinguished senator, Simon, is representing Kaduna Central. Our partners, SCDO, and from the Gates Foundation, senior government officials, representatives from Understand CBN, right? And other commercial banks. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
First of all, I apologize for burdening and at the peak of the meeting, the presentation, I had to be at another meeting before coming in here. I hope that you bear with me on that. I'm sure the SAC has tendered His Excellency's apologies and informed him of why he's not here. So I won't dwell on that again. But I want to extend very sincere and heartfelt appreciations to the Gates Foundation and EFINA. I'm not forgetting the Kaduna State Government Steering Committee for this very wonderful work. It's thought-provoking. I'm very sure it's only going to steer us to action. Data which is reliable, realistic, its importance cannot truly be overemphasized, because that is the only way that you can institute interventions that will target specifics. So we thank you for this, and I'm assuring you that we use it to the best of our ability so that we can make a difference in the lives of people of Kaduna. So I would try and deliver His Excellency's message. I hope that I fit in well. I'll try my best. There are two main reasons why financial inclusion is important for us in Kaduna State as a government. So firstly, it is an accelerator for broad-based socioeconomic growth. The evidence strongly suggests that financial inclusion is a pivot for SME growth and fintech development, which we have been promoting since the inception of this administration as part of our broader economic reform agenda. It accelerates economic growth by providing people at the bottom of the pyramid the tools and opportunities required to spend more efficiently and save more effectively. It empowers lower income households to decide on what financial product best fits their needs. Secondly, financial inclusion plays a pivotal role in promoting the digital transformation required to enhance service delivery across all sectors. As such, it presents enormous opportunities in strengthening linkages between and within social investment and programs. It is also an enabler of other enhancements in governance efficacy, that is around taxation and transparency. Let me just say at this point that during the presentation, you said we're first in Northwest states. I want to assure you that in Kaduna, we are not interested in being first amongst the Northwest states. we want to compete with the Southwest.
Yes. By 3% against 65%.
So we are committed to that, and I assure you that we will achieve on that. So have we done anything so far, or have we actually achieved anything? I would say yes, there are one or two things that we have achieved. So let me just give you a brief of our achievements. What we have had as achievement thus far, and we forward towards financial inclusion things that we just want to let you in on. We have digitized our payments. So Kaduna State government digitized all payments, which is a critical driver of financial inclusion, including our salaries, wages, and we also adopted the treasury symbol. Digital identity. We have the Kaduna Residence Registration Agency, and I'm happy to see that it has captured an estimated 3.5 million residents, and we are on track to actually achieving 90% of the population, 90% enrollment for about 9 million residents by the end of 2022. The Kaduna State Financial Inclusion Community of Practice. We established a financial inclusion community of practice to promote cross-learning that could inform partnerships on financial inclusion. We are partnering with the United Bank for Africa to improve financial access points in all the 23 local government areas of the state. Should I say, on a sad note, I want to say that my local government is one of those local governments that have, yes, my local government and the SAC is one of the local governments in Kaduna State that does not have a bank. So have been having it very, yes, we've been having it very difficult. And unfortunately, people have to travel to either Nasarawa State, Akonga, which is close by, or go to Kafanchan. Either way, there's a lot of risk involved in that travel. The Kaduna State government has also signed a non-binding MOU with fintech solutions providers, Makiba Incorporated. We're working in partnership with IHS Towers to improve and provide mobile network, voice and data in 42 blind spots across the state, with 50% of the installations already
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for holding on. Apologies. We have just, I think the Kaduna State government have just dropped off and they're trying to come back on. Please spare us a few moments, a few minutes. We are trying to get them back on so the Deputy Governor can complete her remarks. And we would also then move on to the panel session where we hope to answer majority of the questions that we have in the Q&A. So just a few minutes, please. We will be back on shortly. Thank you very much, everyone. I can see that Hereta is still here, and I would want to believe that the Deputy Governor should have, concluded her remarks by now. I would want to recommend that we move on to the panel session, because I know we've kept our panelists and our attendees waiting for so long. So, Hereta, I don't know if you want to take up at this point.
Hi, Tommy. 3 of my panelists are in that room. So we need the Kaduna State Government Office to come up.
Okay, let's give them a few more minutes. So apologies, everyone. We really do apologize, but we'll get this running shortly. Thank you, Tunji, for the video. Yes. Yes. So we thank you, Henrietta. So I think we can start with the panelists we have on ground. They are still trying to get back on. I think when they come on, I mean, we could just bring them into the conversation. So thank you very much, Henrietta.
Thank you, Tommy. Good afternoon once again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I would like to stand on existing protocols. Welcome to the panel session, which is part of the formal launch event of the Access to Financial Services in Nigeria 2020 survey, the Kaduna State Deep Dive that we have just attended. As many of you are aware, Kaduna State has established a Financial Inclusion Technical Committee, as you've heard this morning, and also has a standing financial inclusion community of practice, which is really a multi-stakeholder platform that facilitates nuanced discussions on how best to support financial inclusion ambitions of the state. As we've also heard, this is the first time in the 12-year history of the Access to Financial Services in Nigeria survey that we have a detailed research that has been conducted at the state level that provides local government area level representation of the survey. The theme for our panel discussion this afternoon is building the blocks for a financially and economically inclusive Kaduna State. And what we'll try to achieve this afternoon is to have a robust discussion, of course, within the context of the Access to Finance Kaduna State Deep Dive findings and recommendations that we've just discussed, but we would like to have stakeholders have a better understanding, a deeper understanding, and certainly buy-in of what the building blocks are for a financially and economically inclusive Kaduna State, as well as identify areas of possible partnerships, collaboration, and support for financial inclusion within the state. My name is Henrietta Bankole Olushino, and I am the Nigeria Director of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, RPA. I am your moderator for the panel session today, and we have a strong lineup, as you've seen, of professionals working within Kaduna State as well as in the private sector driving the discussion on the panel today. How we expect this panel to work today is to kick off first with the panelists telling us their key takeaways from the Kaduna State Deep Dive survey, and then they will address several rounds of questions, and then we will throw open the floor for questions and answers. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature to send us your questions, and we hope to be able to go through as many of those questions as much as possible. And so very quickly, even though at the very beginning, we did get all of the panelists to introduce themselves, I will do a quick intro of the panelists. Mrs. Saude Amina Atoyebi is currently the Deputy Chief of Staff on Administration to the Governor, and she's also the head of the Kaduna State Social Investment Office. We also have Dr. Paul Oluipe. He's the lead of the Financial Inclusion Delivery Unit at the Central Bank of Nigeria. We have Gerald Ilukwe. He's the Chief Information Officer and Special Advisor on ICT to the Kaduna State Government. We have Dotun Ifebogun. He's the Divisional Head Retail Business of Wema Bank. We have Zayad Siga, who's the Executive Secretary of Kaduna State Residents Registration Agency. And we have Ashley Emmanuel, who's the Chief Executive Officer of EFINA. So I would like to welcome all of our panelists. And I know that some of them are on their way just trying to set up. So I'm going to start off my question this afternoon, direct straight to the Central Bank of Nigeria, since they're in the room. And they have been, the key drivers and the key anchors of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which they have, developed and implemented over the last 10 years, I believe it is. And so, Paul, if you could just put on your video, this question is to you. I know you have the capability to do so. Thank you. Welcome. So my question to you is, Kaduna State has clearly articulated a financial inclusion strategy. They are driving the implementation of the financial inclusion strategy, which is also aligned with the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. How is the CBN able to support and partner with Kaduna State? Over.
Thank you very much for all of that. First of all, I would say I'm really happy with the results coming out of the Kaduna State survey deep dive. And a lot of these outcomes are really consistent with the national average, although some of them significantly deviate, especially the gender gap, which is really wide. Whereas the national average is 6%, that of Kaduna is really very high. But across other metrics, Kaduna is really doing so well. For example, education is at 12%. People who have no formal education is at 12% against the national average, which is much, much higher. What we are doing currently is that there are a lot of ways we can support Kaduna State. For example, in terms of closing the gender gap, we have an access to finance framework for women, which has basically been launched on September 29th last year. And we are currently implementing quite a number of communities of practice across different strategic imperatives, up to 8 strategic imperatives. And one of them is even to strategically accelerate access to ID and access to agents, super agents and financial services agents. I noticed that the deputy governor remarked that her local government is one of those without any financial access point, especially bank branches. So agents, basically, because banks are really reluctant in a number of cases to roll out, bank branches across rural areas and across local governments. If there is no significant business, case, especially in terms of numbers and in terms of deposit mobilization, but agents are very, light. They can set up they are light on the ground. They have very light equipment, and they can set up. The setup costs are very low compared to bank branches. And one of the things we can do, based on what the deputy governor has just said, is to help to accelerate the uptake of agents or the siting of agents across rural areas, across local governments, especially women agents who would be very much, strategic to be able to onboard women in the state. Although Kaduna is doing so impressively, but the gender gap is one of the things that I noted that is really of serious concern. And so implementing the access to finance framework for women will enable us to try and close that gap and help Kaduna on its rise to access to finance. They are doing good, but then other metrics, need to be scaled up. This is just in a nutshell what I think we can do. But then there are other aspects as well, like economic empowerment and linking Kaduna State and to the CBN interventions, especially people who are in the small and medium and small scale enterprises sector. Because I noticed that there are a lot of businesses in Kaduna as well, and women are even more in business than men, because if you look at the results that were shared. And so we can also do more to link them to some microcredit interventions and microcredit facilities that could help them scale their capacity to to drive the entrepreneurship sector of Kaduna State. This is also part of what we can do as interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just three things I take away from this: supporting Kaduna State to close the gender gap, utilizing the CBN's framework for women financial inclusion, supporting them with the CBN's agency framework, and helping them to roll out in the state, as well as economic empowerment, linking Kaduna State to CBN intervention funds, microcredit interventions. Thank you very much. That's very useful. I'll go now to Dotun. Dotun is representative of a financial service provider. Dotun, the report shows high adoption of mobile phones, even in the rural areas in Kaduna State. So from a financial service provider standpoint, how do you feel the uptake and usage of formal financial services? Dotun, if you could just put on your camera.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you for having me. So I'll just take the lead from the question and from the comments of my regulator represented there. The proliferation of the mobile access, it's a very good prerequisite for financial inclusion. We've gotten to the point where banking is no longer about where you go. It is not about the brick and mortar. You can do so much on the phone, and that is the essence of the mobile money approaches to doing banking right now. Now, to help to break this further is to also enumerate the ease that has come up from the point of view of the banks in ensuring that we can have people onboarded within the financial services. As we speak today, using apps on mobile phone, accounts can be opened on the go. As we speak today, using apps on mobile phone, all you need to do is to turn that selfie into an account or a wallet. And with that, you are ready to do transactions. So the ease has been put in place with the efforts of all the banks and all other partners. And the fact that this is also becoming the norm, because the teledensity that we have seen in Kaduna State and all over the nation can actually be turned into a gold mine. And that also takes us to the collaboration that is required within this ecosystem. So the telcos are there providing the infrastructure. Kaduna State is there ensuring that infrastructure is taken around the entire state. We have even the aspect of the insurance, who will be able to take advantage of the lead that the banks and the telcos have presented. And that tells me the need for us to enhance collaboration. It tells me the need for us to enhance advocacy. Because by and large, what has happened is that there's this perception about banking of it being still somewhere you need to go, and the fact that you may not be welcomed within the banking system. That has changed tremendously. A number of policies from the regulators and also other players within the entire ecosystem have also made this very possible. For instance, I heard the deputy governor say something about the state being digitized and wanting to do what we call G2P, as in paying people from the government purses without necessarily moving around. And what that means is that people need to be within the financial sector. For you to be able to open an account, you don't need to go to banks. The agents are there to do that for you. What that does for you is to quickly overcome all those challenges of travels to banking points that you used to know. You can now do that within the agent point. When that is done, what it means is that you can create wallets. Wallet creation now has also democratized this aspect of acquisition of customers for both bankers and the onboarding of people into the banking system. With that, the ease of receipt of your money in e-value will now be the case that we all need to pay attention to. So far, a number of our populace still rely on cash. Yes, cash is there, but the truth of the matter is that you can actually complement the cash with your e-money. The e-money education, the e-money understanding are some of the areas we must also drive throughout the entire community. I'm also very much conversant around the fact that the economic activities within the environment that we're speaking about is high, particularly within the women folk. Again, this is an opportunity to also accommodate these women within the financial inclusion space with proper education. The youth are also there. For the youth who are looking for means of livelihood, they can actually come up on board within the space, get the proper education, get the proper holding that the banks are able to provide within the space, and also ensure that they have sustainable activities that will ensure economic inclusion for them as well. I will also not forget the farming community. The agrarian community within Kaduna State has shown resilience in terms of being willing and able to do so much more, but we need to support them. We need to aggregate them so that they can also pool their resources together in a manner that so many buyers or bulk breakers can come and do business with them as a unit. Those are some of the factors that the banks working with other collaborators can put in place within this economy. And I will not forget the insurance. Insurance penetration has always been an issue nationwide. So Kaduna is not an exception. We generally do not subscribe to insurance, but from collaboration, we can have packages that takes that acquisition of customers through bundles of products that will include banking, that will include insurance, and even by extension, you can have micro pensions to piggyback on this. So, I mean, I see so much that can be done. It's a gold mine. Kudos to Kaduna State for taking this approach, and also kudos to Afina for being able to drill down and point all those aspects of opportunities to the general populace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dotun. I'm going to pivot very quickly and talk about infrastructure, because you did raise infrastructure and it's critical. So I'm going to go to Gerald. So Gerald, this next set of questions are for you. And I'm going to start off by saying Kaduna State government, dropped off this call for several minutes. Clearly, we need a solid digital infrastructure for financial inclusion. But as the CIO, how is the state's ICT strategy addressing the digital financial services infrastructure gaps in the state? Yes, you have a plan, but if there's any shortfall in that plan, how can stakeholders partner or collaborate with the state to address these gaps? Gerald.
I mean, yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Henrietta. Yes, infrastructure is key. It's foundational. And we do have a digital strategy. The digital strategy is two-pronged. The first bit is how does government enabling how government consumes technology to deliver services, okay, which we've talked about, G2P and other things. So government at the back end must be in a position to do that. And then at the other end, at the consumer end, which is at the citizen end, how are we able to enable the citizenry actually get access to financial services? So that's where infrastructure kicks in. And the first infrastructure we'll talk about is connectivity, of course. So in terms of, we're taking a holistic approach to connectivity within government in terms of building a government VPN so that the different agencies that deliver citizen-facing services, especially for financial inclusion, will be in a position to do so and leverage other tools of automation, by which I mean cloud-based solutions, okay? Then the second bit, which we've talked about even during the lunch with the deputy governor and the senior advisor, is in terms of connectivity, data connectivity in unserved and underserved areas. And this also fits into what you're talking about, partnerships. As you know, public sector finances are quite lean today. So we're very open to partnerships. While we want to drive the overall economic well-being through financial inclusion of the state, we're also working in partnerships. So what we're doing with with IHS, which was spoken about earlier, about 40-something communities being brought into the network coverage, data network coverage, and we're going to continue. We have expectations of support from government intervention agencies, namely the USPF and the NCC. We are also, with IHS, it's a partnership, we're supporting them because a lot of these areas, why don't you have financial inclusion? Because you don't have networks. Why don't you have networks? Because for the hard-nosed businesses that are the telcos, these areas are not financially viable. So there's a viability gap, which in the interest of development, we step in to fill by, giving them some subsidy. Then we're also working with Airtel. We signed an MOU with Airtel, which we're about to kick off now in actual implementation. In fact, we have kicked off, to the effect that, as far as it concerns financial inclusion, that by the end of 2022, every nook and cranny of this state will have network coverage. Not 2G, because 2G doesn't enable data unless you now start going to USSD. But we're talking about 3G network connectivity across the entire state. Deputy Governor was talking about Sanga. We talked about banks not being needed now, it's physical, banking is telco, mobile banking, whatever it is, there are different channels now for banking services or for financial services. So that's what we're doing. And then we're encouraging partnerships that deliver cloud-based services. So at the end of the day, where does financial inclusion kick in? It kicks in when you're registering your child in school, when you're, government is supporting some of these initiatives, whether it's school feeding program or registering children in school or going to the hospital, where digitizing these things and the infrastructure has to be in place, both connectivity infrastructure and cloud-based infrastructure at the front end and at the back end. So that's what we're doing. And of course, infrastructure is not just physical, it's also digital identity infrastructure. Zad, who's sitting beside me, heads residence registration agency. And he's also spreading out, fanning out across the state to bring people into the loop. And digital identity is one of the foundational pillars, infrastructural pillars of financial inclusion. So we have a multi-pronged but cohesive approach to this. And I think, it's up to us working with partners. We're very open to partnerships, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the services to be delivered on this infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I think the long story short is Kaduna State is open for partnerships, for infrastructure, as well as for services. Just to take off to add something that you spoke about, the viability gap. So from your perspective, what needs to be prioritized to catalyze, the growth of the drive of this infrastructure strategy? So what is critical in terms of what needs to be prioritized? Given that there are finite resources, yes, there are partnerships and collaborations, but what do we need to do most urgently, to your mind?
Well, what we need to do, which we're doing, is supporting the rollout of these networks. We're doing that. We're supporting the network. The building blocks are in place. We need to bring them together. That's very important. We need to bring them together. And what we need to do as well, which another study revealed, we need to be able to actually deliver on low-hanging fruits. Okay, somebody had spoken about infrastructure. Had spoken about insurance, and insurance is phase 2. Phase 1 is G2P, payments. Okay, so we have the social register. We have vulnerable people here. So what we need to do is say, look, end to end, from infrastructure to service, let us put something in place that enables us to say, you know what, working with the federal government, conditional cash transfers and other things that help our poor, we need to be able to do that and put everything in place that will enable us to do that immediately.
Great, thank you. So from end-to-end infrastructure to service, that's the focus of Kaduna State it as the fundamental for driving financial inclusion, even for economically areas that are not so viable.
Yes. So focusing on our vulnerable citizenry. So that becomes our case, our use case. You know, it's okay to put the building blocks in place, but if you are not able to actually realize value by focusing on a use case, then you will not get the uptake. Down the line, you might not make as much progress as you research.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gerald. I'm going to go on to Saude now. We saw a lot of the numbers. I think Saude, clearly the financial inclusion gender gap has increased by 10%. We saw some interesting numbers, you know, around the gender disparity, how 84% of men were involved in making their own decision about how money is spent in households against 53% for women. And we can go on and on. But when we then come to phone ownership, the margins are not as wide. You know, it's 9% men owning phones to 76% women. And I know that you are in the field and you see this, you know, almost on a daily basis. Could you speak to these gender divides as they occur on the field and in the delivery of your social investment programs? And talk to us about what can be done to address the persistent gaps in inclusion for women in the state. Of course, not forgetting young adults and those in the rural areas as well. Just share with us some initiatives that you're running and, you know, that are hoping to address these concerns. Saude.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. It was quite concerning to see the figures, but at the same time, I could validate that what the results show is actually what obtains in the state, because while concerning, it's something that we see every day. In terms of the gender divide, we also have to look at what are the drivers.
The Kaduna State office seems to have dropped off again. We'll come back to Saude when they get back up. But in the interim, I would go back to Paul. Paul, what I'd like you, and thank you for the commitments, I will say, of how the CBN is able to support financial inclusion in Kaduna State. But I'd like to ask a more general question. Are industry stakeholders doing enough to address financial inclusion challenges in the state? And how can regulators and FSPs better align to accelerate financial inclusion in the state?
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of doing enough, I think can you hear me? In terms of,
it's fading in and out a bit.
Okay, in terms of doing enough, we need more of coordination. When we talk about coordination, we mean a structured coordination and synchronized coordination across the industry. We need coordination between banks to offer financial products and services that are tailored to the communities that or rural areas and even excluded areas that we want to reach. In terms of products and services, we do not have enough products and services that are targeting these segments that we want to reach, but we are targeting them with the same conventional financial products and services that are targeted at high value, high volume individuals. And essentially the conditions of these products are not necessarily, amenable or friendly to these people at the bottom of the ladder, at the income ladder. So we need products that are targeting micro segments, products that are, targeting micro loans, micro insurance, in very tailored forms, targeting these individuals to try and bring them on. Also, platforms to reach them need to be tailored to their needs. For example, you cannot use sophisticated DFS or digital financial services, platforms to reach these individuals. Although, the data says they have a lot of, there's a deep mobile telephone saturation or penetration in these areas, and then we need to look at that as well, to ride on mobile telephony to try and reach them. And then infrastructure is another thing that is really critical. Industry stakeholders, I think, need to do more to roll out infrastructure in these areas. Mobile phone connectivity is a key snag, a key problem in terms of transactions. If you want to send money across, peer-to-peer transfers or government to people transfers, they ride on the back of network. And the network backbone in rural areas is most times very, very poor. And so we need to scale it. What of in terms of ID? A lot of the people you see, the youths and the people you see in rural areas, most times do not have means of identification or even address verification. So how would they be able to scale any KYC hurdle? We need to do more in terms of rolling out the ID. Although Kaduna State is doing very well, over 80% of people, I think over 80, have IDs. But we need to look at the youth segment. The youth segment, people who are going to go into adulthood very soon, who will also be very active in the economy. We need to target them with IDs so that they will be immediately begin to interact with financial products and services even before they transit into full adulthood. So these are some of the things we need to do, industry stakeholders need to do. And then complementary regulations that are adaptable to the needs of the people who are coming up, and not regulations that are stifling the space and not not really making it friendly for people to play. So it's also a call to all other regulators to join and coordinate together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I was just smiling here when you were going through your discussion because, I hear you, better coordination among service providers, products and services that are fit for purpose, infrastructure in the rural areas, means of ID and the KYC huddle. The reason I pause there is the CBN is the owner of the KYC regulation, especially as it pertains to financial services. And of course, you ended with complementary regulations, which is adaptable to the people that the CBN is trying to target. My follow-on question to that really is around the KYC huddle. Paul, is it impossible? Today we have mobile phones, and to be able to get a mobile phone, you have to register your SIM in Nigeria. And we have people who have done, to register that SIM, you need to do your 10 biometric fingerprinting, you need, address and all of that, all done by the telcos. Is it possible from a complementary regulation standpoint to see how we can marry the existing, what we have from the telco industry with some of the regulations that the CBN is putting forward, especially when it pertains to ID and KYC? Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There are laws. If we need to dig deeper or go backwards, I would not say it is impossible to marry a lot of the artifacts, ID artifacts, or databases that exist about individuals in Nigeria. But it's a very onerous process, given that we have a lot of laws, and sometimes these laws are disparate.
All that.
Mute us, please.
Okay. So sometimes these laws are disparate and they are fragmented. For example, we have multiple ID issuing institutions or agencies in Nigeria. We have national ID, we have passport, we have road safety, we have VIO, with driver's license. We have so many things. So what we need to do first is to try at unification or integration of all of these different forms of information. It is not impossible to do, but there are laws, national laws that need to be amended first because CBN cannot go unilaterally to try and say, okay, we are going to adopt this or adopt that, but we need to work in coordination. And that's what I'm trying to say, that some of these laws need to be maybe, adapted and then you unify and integrate before CBN. CBN is only one aspect of the entire system. Like we kind of superintend over the financial system, but we cannot dictate to other government agencies as to, you know, what they need to do in terms of ID and laws. So that's why we are talking about coordination. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that. I will go back to Kaduna State. They are back up. So Kaduna State, if you just put on your video, I'd like to pivot a bit. We've spoken a bit about the Kaduna State's drive to register their citizens, and on the back of the questions that Paul has just answered to or spoken to around identity. I would like to go to Zayad, and my question to you, Zayad, is, so we know that financial inclusion varies widely by local government areas, and the A2F study also has enumerated and estimated the adult population to be 4.1 million in Kaduna State. We're also aware that you've done quite a lot of work in terms of digital identity, which is pivotal for digital financial services and financial inclusion. To date, you stated, it has been stated on this call that Kaduna State has registered about 2.5 million residents. And so quite some work has been done in this area. Could you speak to your Kaduna State's current enrollment drive and strategy across the state, and what the state government is currently doing to address gaps, especially in the rural areas? Zayad. Kaduna State, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Thank you very much for the question, Henrietta. So actually, we have currently registered about 4 million residents, and based on the data we have about our population, that puts us at about the coverage of 40%. And actually, if you look at the national figures, Kaduna State has actually covered the most in terms of per capita coverage. Interestingly as well, the A2F survey suggests that we have 4.1 million adults. And based on the 4 million that we have registered, just about 10% are actually minors. So that suggests that about 3 out of 4 of our adults in Kaduna State have already been registered into our database. And in terms of how we are planning to improve on that, we are working very hard to improve the number of centers that we have. We have currently about 90, and we are trying to scale them up to about 255. Of course, with only state resources, it's going to be very difficult, because to actually activate one center, we need equipment to the tune of about 2 million naira. And that is why we try to bring in the development partners who have goals that are aligned with digital identity to help us with equipment in particular. A couple of months ago, we actually received such support from USAID, and with which we'll be activating 25 more centers very soon. So by scaling up the number of centers that we have, I think we'll be able to go deeply into the rural areas, because currently our best coverage is that we have at least one center in each local government. But each local government in Kaduna State has about 10 to 12 wards. So if we're able to scale up to 255, we would be able to have one registration center for every political ward of the state. And once we do that, it will put us on we'll be able to raise up the average enrollment figures per month and put us on a path to actually cover the entire state by December 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zayad. And thank you for the numbers. So just to, in addition to what you've spoken about, are there any other deliberate partnerships that are required or targeted? You spoke about development partners, but what about the private sector in helping to build that infrastructure and to facilitate enrollment, especially, to support the financial inclusion drive, especially for the rural areas?
Yes, so actually I would like to mention that to comply with federal laws, what we do in Kaduna State with regards to digital identity is in line with what NIMC does at the federal level, because they are the ones that actually have the mandate to issue digital identity and to store the biometrics of Nigerian citizens. So for you to get a Kaduna State resident number or a resident card, you must have a national identification number. So while previously in Kaduna State, for you to get a national identification number, the burden was on Kaduna State Residence Registration Agency and NIMSI. Currently, things have changed a little bit because as at the beginning of this year, NIMSI have now started issuing enrollment licenses to other private sector companies. Of course, this is to expedite digital ID issuance to all Nigerians. However, since they started working at the beginning of the year, we observed that they were not as active in Kaduna State as they were in other states, for example, Kano and Lagos. So consequently, we engaged some of them through NIMSI to find out what is the challenge that they're having in working with Kaduna. So to help them come and set up in Kaduna, we started offering them public facilities to work out of for free, which will save, of course, their running costs.
Do you have another internet?
I don't know. Ben has even talked to you.
Okay, I see Kaduna State, they still have a bit of challenge in terms of their network. So I'll move it along, pending when they return to Dotun. Dotun, as a financial service provider, and we heard you when you spoke about products, even insurance, but awareness and low product knowledge remains a key barrier to uptake of formal and other non-bank services in the state. So what approach should be adopted to address this lingering challenge, and what role should each stakeholder play? I know that you did mention, you spoke about apps and things like that, but bear in mind that these are people that are in the rural areas. They only have feature phones. They don't have smartphones. So what approach can we take to address the challenge of low product knowledge, and what role should stakeholders play? Dotun.
Okay, thank you. For that aspect of the activity, a lot of dependence on the communities themselves are necessary. Now, from some of the activities that we have done, what we have been able to do is to identify people of means within communities. Usually the communities have themselves in groups. There are age groups, there are market groups, there are even, youth groups. All those groups are avenues to disseminate all this information. And mind you, when I mention apps, they are no longer as sophisticated as you think. They are just simple, basic tools that can be used by even future phones owners. Now, what happens or what needs to happen is we would need to get more closer to such people, such groups. We would need to see advocacy as a point of CSR, if you may call it so, because at the end of the day, when the well-being of the economy is good, then they will be wealthy. And when they are wealthy, everybody within the value chain will participate and benefit from it. So some of the activities that are done right now are messages that can be transcribed even on the future phones by SMSs in languages, local languages. Okay, you have messages in Pidgin, you have messages in Hausa and all other local languages. That's already been done by a number of the telcos in collaboration with partners who are interested in engaging people. You can actually have messaging that would focus on a particular cluster that you want to have meetings with. And when you use the local headships around the places and let them understand on their own the benefits of what you're doing, it makes it easier for adoption. The adoption issue from the point of view of the financial services provider has actually been simplified. Like I said, with the use of feature phones, you can actually do USSD transactions. Those are transactions that are on the go for anybody that wants to do basic transfers here and there. With the use of just basic phones that are a bit higher grade on the phone ladder over the future phones, agents can actually use that to open an account for anyone, get the picture of that person, and get that person within the financial system. And what that does is that the ease of onboarding has been provided. With the Kaduna State that has plans to ensure infrastructures go around within the system, it has become even more complementary. Now, if I have to go back to what Dr. Paul said, what we have right now are products that speak to the specifics of locations. Gone are the days where we'll be applying the generic packages into specific individuals or specific groups of people. We have been able to democratize, if I may use that word, the issues of products and propositions for consumers across the entire framework. And this is ongoing within all banks. It's not just about a particular entity. Those are the essence of digitization that we have all found ourselves in. Those are the essence of the fintech's involvement in all the activities that we do. Some of the questions on the chat even suggest the use of fintechs for dissemination of microloans. These are already happening even within the USSD. What we need to do is to pull together more, let everybody have a big cake to take bites out of, rather than one person wanting to take 100% of nothing. Those are the issues that we must have to do within partners. Those are the issues that would expect all the policymakers to take into consideration. So at the end of the day, we would have a robust economy that includes everybody, even from the service providers themselves, so that we can now include the downlines and follow the money as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. I'd like to go back to Kaduna State. I think, Saude, I'll kick off with you again. I know you started to respond to the question around the gender gap. So I'll just give you the opportunity to complete that response. And if I can actually go back to the question. So really, if you could just speak to the gender divides and what some of the gender-centric issues are that are inhibiting the participation of women in the financial ecosystem, and what you're doing to address, the persistent gaps in inclusion for women, young adults, and those in rural areas. Saudi.
Thank you, Henrietta. Unfortunately, I had gone on for like 5 minutes, not knowing we were disconnected. I'll just quickly try to recap what I had said to the people in the room. I just said that the study had validated what we see on the field. Indeed, many of these challenges and disparities between men and women in terms of financial inclusion are driven by our sociocultural norms, first of all. And there's also the level of education, there's the economic capacity of the women in comparison to men. And a very important part, which often gets overlooked, is the financial confidence of women. One of the things we're doing in partnership with yourselves and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is to work out a strategy to improve the confidence of these women, because we've had cases where women have bank accounts, but it's just cash in, cash out. As mentioned earlier in the conversations in the first session, we have cases where women have accounts, they just go in to take their money and that's it, and they won't go there. And there are several factors that come into play. Sometimes it's the distance, sometimes it's the treatment at the banks, sometimes it's just the sheer difficulty of navigating, filling forms, or even withdrawing from an ATM. So it's that bad for some of these groups that we work with. So one of the things we're trying to work on is build their confidence, help them understand how the systems work. We take for granted that we know these things and they come to us easily. But for them, they just can't figure it out. They don't understand why I should put a card, punch some numbers. How much do I get out of the machine? It's so complicated. It's rocket science for some people. So we want to work on that to see how we can improve the knowledge of these people and boost their confidence for them to be able to know what their rights are, how to access the services. In terms of sociocultural norms, those are much more complicated, and those will take a lot more time to resolve. But we're working with key authority figures within the communities, such as the traditional rulers and the religious leaders as well, to speak to these women, to encourage them, to speak to the men, to allow the women be. Because many times, if I tell you the stories we see, so some women have bank accounts and they have to submit them to their husbands. So meaning some men go as far as purchasing the goods needed for this woman to work. And it's a woman earning the money, but she can't do anything about it. So there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of engagements that need to take place. Tell the men to let this woman be, because in the end, when a woman is able to earn a living, she will take care of her family, she'll take care of the children, she'll reduce the burden on you. So there's a lot that has to go on, even in terms of the kind of communication from the financial service providers. It's easy to be generic when you're speaking to an educated group, people who are in urban areas. But for these people, what is the advantage? Why should they go to a bank? Why should they be financially included? What's the benefits? Many of them don't see any benefits. So we need to go and drill down to what the problems are, what the opportunities are for them if they get financially included. For the young people and groups in rural areas, a lot of interventions are ongoing in the state. There are lots of agricultural interventions, which we believe that if they become economically empowered, automatically they come under the financial system, be it formal or informal. We have the Kaduna State Women Empowerment Fund, which is one of the areas that we're working through. It's a 200 million naira fund targeted specifically for women, and they're able to access loans to aid their businesses to either start up or support existing businesses. And of course, automatically, all of them need to be in the financial system to access those funds. We have another World Bank intervention coming up targeted at MSMEs. We believe a lot of our youth and unemployed persons in the rural areas can benefit from. So there are lots of these interventions going on side by side to reduce the disparity. And beyond the male-female disparity, there's also the rural-urban disparity that we see in the field where we work. So a lot of interventions are going on to try and bridge that gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saudi. So the last question before we throw it open for the Q&A from the participants is to Ashley. And Ashley, as someone who has been, neck deep in working through this data, as part of the, the findings and just understanding what this all means, what would you say is the business case for financial inclusion uptake that will favor both supply and demand side actors? Ashley.
The small question. Thanks, Henrietta. I mean, but it is really critical. I think, I think some of the, I'm excited about what we see in the data, and also some of the feedback, and what we're hearing is kind of the thinking and the actions to date that's being taken by Kaduna State government, by Wema Bank and some of the other partners who are here today. And that's all to say that I think, obviously you need to use digital financial services, so something that's digital, that's really developed to take advantage of the cost savings associated with this digital financial services and really mobile money operating models. So what we've seen in many countries across sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world is that mobile money sort of business models can reach relatively quickly, kind of expand access and reach lower income groups, because there is a business case that actually makes it profitable at a certain level of scale to conduct a very large volume of transactions, even if you don't make a lot of money on each individual transaction. And there's been some kind of good research and analysis done, and I think we've seen more of the kind of use cases around the world that show that that's possible to do. There's certain, you definitely need to be kind of a mobile money or a mobile financial service and use that kind of a model. And I think that there's a certain scale of investment that's usually required. And then, as we were talking about before, that really also builds on agent networks. So building out those access points, which, I'm sort of excited around the potential for that in Kaduna State. And oftentimes, again, there's upfront investment, but I think with the right sort of enabling the right players and the right partnerships, that is certainly possible to deploy more widespread agent networks and those kind of mobile money business models. I think that we may have cut out during this point when we were in the session with the deputy governor earlier. But something I thought that was interesting that she mentioned when she was delivering the governor's remarks was that it's important. She was talking about the PSB model, basically, and the importance of moving telcos from, quote, the fringes to being PSBs themselves. So I think that it was interesting for me to hear that in the governor's remarks as well. And I think that's an example of, bringing many players into the system, and hopefully with the right kinds of partnerships as well, we can then really have that expanded reach in a profitable way that's affordable and relevant for all kind of residents in Kaduna State, including the lowest income groups.
Great, thank you very much, Ashley. So we go now to the participants. There are quite a number of questions in the chat, in the Q&A chat. There's specific questions, just I think feeding off what you've just spoken about mobile money and payment service banks. There's some questions around how can mobile money operators partner with the government to serve the unbanked and leverage on the mobile phone facility to increase financial inclusion. Questions around, are you considering leveraging the ubiquity of mobile money vendors like OPay in achieving a sustainable enrollment of new users in rural areas for community-based health insurance schemes? So I'll just throw that question. I think, Zayad, you would have some, because they're talking about enrollment using players such as OPay to support your citizens' enrollment drive, say, for example, especially in the rural areas. And I know that Gerald has had to leave. He had to go to the airport, and he sends his apologies. So I'll just ask Zayad to speak, especially to the enrollment part. Zayad.
Okay, thank you for the question, Henrietta. So there are two ways it can happen. So we can either partner with private companies that already have links with NIMSI and they have enrollment licenses. We can work with them and support them to push the enrollment in the rural areas. Alternatively, as well, we are open to working with people that have the equipment. We are talking about biometric devices, fingerprint scanners, iris scanners, and such. As long as you meet either of the two requirements, we are definitely open to collaborating with private companies.
Great, thank you very much, Zayad. There's another question around the new changes in the mobile money framework, allowing savings wallets, and will it change or impact the financial behaviors of the users or populace in Kaduna State, and then aiding or facilitating financial inclusion? I would actually ask Dotun to answer that question. Dotun.
Okay, certainly that will improve the inclusion, no doubt about that. Because what that has done is to bring simplicity into the process of account opening. So what is a wallet? A wallet is typically an account which enables you to do cash in, cash out, and transfers. And what that means is that you can, with the simplest form of information and data, open a wallet. And like I said previously, wallets can actually be opened with the USSD string, which is applicable to a number of banks right now. So from point of view of the readiness of the service providers to make this happen, yes, we are there. Then the next issue would be for the populace to adopt this. The adoption side of it also would involve everyone that is interested in financial inclusion. I've always pointed that out. So for instance, what Zayad said around having partnerships with the likes of the OPay must be taken beyond what the intent of OPay is to align with the intent of the Kaduna State government. If you leave it to a typical fintech, they will do the transactions and move on. But we want people to open account. Now that the ease of account acquisition has been taken to the wallet space, what that means is that everyone can actually make that happen and make it easy for onboarding for the populace. And largely, what that will do is when they get used to working with the wallet and transacting through the wallet, they will be more comfortable to transit to the proper account if the need arises, and also have a broader view around what it takes to be a properly banked individual and how to be economically active, which now leads to the issue of access to support from financial institutions as well, which speaks to the issue of the SME that was also mentioned. Those will now enhance the ability for those individuals who have been properly ingrained in these financial services to take benefit of loan services, to take benefit of every other thing that would help them to improve on their activities as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dotun. So there's a question here, and this question is for Paul, clearly from the CBN, that talks about the CBN's digital currency, which is set to be launched in Q4 2021. And the question is, what are your views on how this will be or could be a potential game changer for financial inclusion, as well as especially around areas remittances, social and humanitarian interventions?
Thank you very much. The digital currency would help also accelerate financial inclusion while also serving as a store of value, and would also counter a lot of the negative aspects of some of the digital currencies that are unregulated in this space, thereby, helping curb fraud, helping curb digital fraud, and some of the scams that Nigerians and even very unwary and vulnerable people fall, for in Nigeria. So that is part of it. It also helps with financial system stability and digital financial services stability. So it helps us as a store of value. It will help accelerate financial inclusion by helping people to store their value in digital form, enabling the banks also have digital deposits. And bear in mind, it is digital. So in terms of digital financial inclusion, it will serve a whole lot of purposes as banks and other financial institutions adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I would like to go on to the next question, which I think should be answered by Saudi. It speaks about the fact that it showed, the survey showed a vast majority of the financially excluded adults are basically into farming. The question is there any synergy or link with which these excluded farmers can be made to embrace financial inclusion services? So for example, providing access to agricultural inputs through financial inclusion service providers. So, encouraging financial service providers basically to provide agric inputs as part of their drive to get farmers. So Saudi, if you could answer that question.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think part of one of the things I had raised earlier when I got cut off was about the social register. And what that does, it's it has a lot of variables in it. We're currently at about 2.6 million of the poorest of the poor in Kaduna State. We have their names, where they live, their sources of livelihood, the number of people in the household, the number of children. It has a lot of data in it. One of the things we're currently working on is disaggregating those who are farmers from the register. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. I heard the CBN earlier talking about the interventions, but we've not sat together to say, okay, can we provide you the data while you provide the funds to these people? We're currently working with Zayad because we've realized that a lot of them don't have identity. They don't have any identity, any form of identity. And now we're trying to ensure that everyone on the social register has a Kaduna State residence registration, agency card, or number. So there's a lot of collaboration that can be done between ourselves as government officials and the private sector, because we know there are lots of these interventions. One of the things we're trying to do, Kaduna State has a social protection policy. What does this policy seek to achieve? To bring everything together, rather than the siloed attempts at alleviating poverty, at having people who are financially excluded, treated by individual groups. We want to bring them all as a whole, and people can take parts and bits of it and address. So we're happy to collaborate with whoever. We have a strategy in the state. It's just a case of us coming together and sit and mapping out a course, to address these issues.
Great. Thank you very much, Saudi. There are quite a number of questions, and I'm trying, as much as possible. My mandate is to bring this to a close by 2 p.m. at the latest. And so just one more question that we will take. And there's a question here, and I think it should go to Paul, around the payment service bank licensing. So there's a question here that speaks about G2P and microcredits being one of the key drivers for financial inclusion. And with the restrictions on PSBs, can they be allowed to be a distribution channel for microcredits since they are lighter and have better opportunities for penetration? Paul.
Look, thank you very much. I do not think that the payment services.
Sorry, your sound is fading out.
Can you hear me?
Right now, yes.
Okay. So the payment services banks are meant to be, warehouses of payment, facilitators and intermediaries of payments. Now, when you talk about microcredit, we already have sufficiently enabled the microfinance banks. So I would direct your attention to the microfinance banks and other financial institutions. Okay, and I would like you to read the provisions of the payment services banks, the licensing provisions, in what they can or cannot do. But in terms of microcredit for, people who are vulnerable, people who are the low-end segments and micro sector, you need to be looking at the other financial institutions and the microfinance banks as they are sufficiently enabled to be able to scale this sector and empower this sector. And there are so many microfinance banks in Nigeria, and there are so many other financial institutions, development financial institutions as well. And then we even have the, NISA Microfinance Bank, National Microfinance Bank, which was launched, 2 years ago. And this has a wider reach in almost all the local governments trying to expand. And so we already have something that is very critical to scaling that sector. The payment services banks as a niche, they are critical to financial inclusion, obviously, because they will provide payment platforms and act as intermediaries for clearing for payments, even whatever form of payment, both person to person or G2P, they are allowed to really operate in terms of that. But in terms of credit to a micro sector, you also need to be looking at the microfinance banks because that's what they are, clearly carved out to function. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And with that, I'd like to summarize that what we've heard today is that Kaduna State is open for financial inclusion. This is clearly something the state takes seriously and is strategically focusing on the implementation of a financial inclusion agenda. We've heard today that the state is open for partnerships, public sector, development sector, private sector collaboration. We've heard from the CBN how they can support Kaduna State's drive. We've heard about how infrastructure, what existing partnerships there are around infrastructure. But more importantly, there's room for more collaboration from infrastructure through to services. We've spoken about the women, the gender gap, and the work that the Social Investment Office is doing, trying to drive not only access, but also usage and digital confidence of the women, also targeting the youth as well as those in the rural areas. We've heard about the state's residents registration drive as well, and they're also open to partner with development sector as well as with private sector in actually ramping up the registration of Kaduna State citizens, because it is critical for financial services. And so with that, I'd like to thank all my panelists. Saude Amina Atoyebi, thank you very much. Paul Oluipe, thank you very much. Zayad Siga, thank you very much. Dotun Ifebogun, thank you very much. Gerald Ilukwe, even though he had to leave, we still thank him. And then lastly, but not the least, Ashley Emmanuel, thank you. It has been my honor to anchor this session. I will call on Shuda Ahmed to give the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and participating at this session and the first session as well. We hope you learned more about what Kaduna State is doing with regards to financial inclusion, taking care of the vulnerable people, and yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and we're open to partnerships, as earlier said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.